A pleasant day to Instructor Romel Edang. I am Josie Buncalon, a third-year student taking up Bachelor of Science in Hospitality Management. Here I am today to present to you the loss of obligations in the tourism and hospitality sector in our subject, Legal Aspect in Tourism and Hospitality. As you can see on the slide, obligations and contracts are among the subjects of the Civil Code of the Philippines. So in this lesson, we will study some civil obligations which, when violated, or have legal effects or consequences. In tourism and hospitality establishments, entering into different contracts are part of the operation of the business. Once the contract is executed, the parties must abide with the terms and conditions stated therein and consider it as if it is the law that governs them. A breach or violation of the terms and conditions may give rise for damages. So in this lesson aims to explain the basic principles of the law on obligations and contracts and to understand how this law creates a relationship between the parties. Let's proceed to the applicable provisions of the law on obligations and contracts. As you can see on the slide, the Article 1156, it says obligation is a juridical necessity to give, to do, or not to do. First, the obligation referred to in the above article is a civil obligation, meaning only those obligations which is not performed by one party. The other party may go to court to enforce the obligation or simply to hold such person to pay for damages. Next, not all obligations are enforceable before the courts. Elements of obligation. The first element of obligation is passive subject, which is known also as obligor or debtor, the person who has the duty to fulfill the obligation. Example, Miss Salcedo obliged herself to deliver 800 sets of tour kit to JJ Tours and Travel. So who is the obligor? The answer is Miss Salcedo because she is the one who has the obligation. The second element is the active subject. The person who has the power to demand the fulfillment of the obligation, which is also called the creditor or oblige. Example, Miss Salcedo obliged herself to deliver 500 sets of tour kit to AAA Tours and Travel, owned by Miss Velasco. So, who is the oblige? Miss Velasco is the obligee or creditor. In case of the failure of Miss Salcedo to perform her obligation, Miss Velasco may demand the fulfillment of the obligation of Miss Salcedo. The third element of obligation is prestation, which is the object of the obligation to give, to do, or not to do. And the fourth element of obligation is juridical tie, the vinculum or that which binds the debtor and creditor. What are considered as civil obligations? The following are sources of civil obligations. Number 1, law. Second, contracts. The third, quasi-contracts. The fourth, acts or omissions punishable by law or Quasidelex. The fifth is the Quasidelex. Law, which obligations arising from law are not presumed only. Those obligations expressly determined by law are demandable. Second is the contracts. Contracts which is under Article 1305, which is contract is a meeting of the minds whereby one binds himself with respect to other to give something or render some services. If a person entered into a contract, an obligation will arise. In case of non-fulfillment of these obligations, the injured party can sue the other before the court for breach of contract. The third is Quasicontra, where this is based on the principle of unjust enrichment, meaning no one shall be enriched at the expense of others. There is no meeting of the minds between parties in the source of obligation. However, equity and law dictates that a person benefited from the act of other has the obligation to reimburse or pay whatever expenses incurred by the latter. Number 4 is acts or omissions punishable by law or delict, which is under the revised Penal Code of the Philippines, where any person criminally liable is also civilly liable. The civil liability pertains to the damages that must be paid arising from the offense committed. The last is the Quasidelex, which is culpa aquiliana, which is under the Civil Code. Whoever will cause damage or injury to another due to fault or negligence, where there being no pre-existing contractual obligations, shall be held liable for damages. Requisites of Quasidelex. First, there is negligence on the part of the defendant or the person who committed such. Second, that the negligence causes damage or injury to another. The third, there must be no pre-existing contractual obligation between the parties. So, that's the end of my presentation, the loss of obligations in the tourism and hospitality sector. Thank you for listening and have a good day.